Hi guys, today we'll be talking about how to maintain good mental hygiene during college, especially during the first year when everyone's transitioning from living at home to living in a completely new environment with new responsibilities and freedom. As many of you know, I'm currently in my first semester of college at Emory University, and it's had its ups and downs, so I wanted to share some things with you that I wish I knew before college. But I still have a lot to learn. So to help us out today is Dr. Tenille Gaines, Executive Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at Emory, and Dr. RaiNesha Miller, who's a licensed psychologist newly on staff from Johns Hopkins University's Mental Health Services. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we go on?
Thank you for having us, and my hope is that this helps to demystify some things around mental wellness and hygiene.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you guys. So the first question's really broad, but in general, why do you think change is hard? Whether that's starting college is a change, moving places, new jobs, people tend to struggle with these things. Why do you guys think that is?
I think anything that takes us out of what we're familiar with, what we're comfortable with, can be frightening. And I think that there's a lot of uncertainty that exists around change. And sometimes we tend to err on the side of looking at things from more of a negative perspective in terms of change, instead of kind of valuing some of the opportunities that exist within change and the learning opportunities and how we can grow from some of those challenges faced. So anything that takes you away from what you're used to can be challenging.
Yeah, also to that uncertainty piece, the newness of it all. In my experience with working with students, I hear over and over again, what if I can't? So this idea of, what if I transition into this change and something happens that I don't know how to handle? So it's almost as if you are anticipating your ability to survive the change. And that not knowing, will you be able to survive it, makes change very difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of it is fear of the unknown. Because when you're doing the same routine with the same people, everything's set. But when you do anything new, then you don't know the challenges that are going to come. And then all the worst case scenarios start playing in people's heads.
Yeah, we like to be prepared.
We do.
Yeah, and that's something you can't necessarily do with something that's uncertain. You don't know what you need to know.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to flex that muscle, you know, and I think the only way to build that tolerance around not knowing is to take risk sometimes. And that involves change, trying new things.
So do you guys think there's a such thing as too much change?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I find myself sometimes kind of sharing with students that typically one transition in and of itself is difficult for all the reasons that we discussed. But let's say, for instance, a student just got to campus. They're meeting new people, they're roommates, and maybe they're starting a new romantic relationship. That's 4 different changes all at once. And each of those changes has their own set of unknowns and uncertainties, right? And so all of those things coalesce and creates a sense of being overwhelmed, which we know can lead into stress. So a lot of change can be very overwhelming. And in a perfect world, I would advise against it. But sometimes life doesn't give us the opportunity to choose when we have to step into change.
Yeah, absolutely. That was perfect. And so that's why it's important for all of us to recognize your limitations and to set some boundaries around things, because all of the things that you mentioned are all fun and exciting and they're new, but they do bring their own level of stress, as you've stated. So I always like to tell folks to take things in doses, do it in moderation.
Absolutely.
You don't have to go all in, and I think that's what we try to do, and especially, you know, when you're just starting school, when you're just starting college, you want to do everything all at one time. But you've got 4 years, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 7, because everyone's journey is different. And so take it in doses.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because a lot of times people come here and they're like, I'm going to get a job right away. I'm going to get research right away. I'm going to do this club. I'm going to do this competition. But a lot of people told me start slow and then slowly add things to your plate.
Yes.
So what specific aspects of the transition to college do you think are stressful for students, and what can they do to deal with these aspects?
Independence. I think it can be two sides of one coin. This idea that you're away from home for the very first time, and yes, I get to make all my own decisions. But there's sometimes a burden that comes with making your own decisions. You have to weigh the pros and the cons of things. And if something falls through, that feeling of, oh, the consequences are only on my shoulder. So a lot of times, surprisingly, students can get overwhelmed with this idea of, I'm independent. I'm independent, and that could lead to some resistance or some hesitation towards reaching out for help, because going off to college, independence is the big thing that we push, especially in our culture, but it has a downside, feeling like I can't reach out for help. I have to do this by myself, but that's not the case. That's not the case at all.
Yeah. And I think if we stick to, just kind of the notion of having more independence, there's independence around time, there's independence around thought, which I think can be challenging for a lot of students when you are finally in a place where you're like, wow, I can begin to think for myself. I don't necessarily have the influence of my family immediately present, but yet they're still in the background.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about, how do I fit in this new space and in this new world that I'm now a part of? And so I think that opens up a lot of things for students in terms of identity and exploration. And that can be stressful when you feel like you cannot reach out for the support. So I would identify that as a major stressor for students.
When you think about times when you changed a lot, when your identity was forming, it's often in hindsight, like, oh, who would have thought this would have influenced me so much? But over here, it's like actively, there's so many decisions that you're making, trying to figure out who you want to be. Like, oh, am I the kind of person who goes out every night? And do I study in? What kind of friends? What kind of hobbies? You're very actively creating your own identity instead of reacting to things that are happening outside of your control.
Yes,
absolutely.
And one of the things I will add, kind of related to that, college and university life is in many ways a self-study. You are in a microcosm of a perpetual classroom. And so I often tell people, I had been experiencing things throughout my life, but it was college that I learned the language to explain the experiences. And so perpetually being in this learning environment, it increases your awareness of your surroundings, your relationships, and even of yourself, right? So not only are you navigating coursework, but you're navigating your own personal self-study, because you are literally 24/7 searching, thinking, pursuing knowledge. And that can be fun, and it can be a culture shock, an internal culture shock.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I felt that here, because in high school, you are given the homework, you do the assignments, the structure is very much laid out for you. And over here, it's like, A, what are my study habits? What do I like to do? And then B, especially in the beginning of the year, I felt like I wasn't being social enough and making friends. And at the same time, I felt like I wasn't studying enough and getting things done. So I think what I've realized is a lot of times it feels like people are going out and partying every night, but those people are the ones talking about it. They're the ones posting on social media. In reality, everyone does, but your balance is going to be personal to you.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Let's stick with culture shock if we can for a little bit, because let's talk about folks who are coming to an environment that is either more diverse or less diverse than where they're coming from. And that ushers in a lot as well. You know, if you are someone who grew up in a small town and now suddenly you're on a campus with 16,000 students, pretty diverse student body, how do you handle that?
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that are in place that probably cause you to question some of the beliefs that you held. And if you don't know how to hold that, I think it can be very distressing for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And I think related to that too, we see a lot of difficulty around this time of year where students have been away for the first time and now they're going back home, but they're returning home as a new version of themselves. Yeah. And so contemplating the culture shock of going back, will my family still relate to me? Will we still agree?
Will I relate to them?
Exactly. So the culture shock goes kind of both ways for all the reasons we've discussed, because being on campus, it kind of forces you to face yourself, question, rebuild, reconceptualize, and you're taking that newness back home and wondering, will it still fit? Will I still be a part of the picture?
Yeah. I think the other thing that often makes kids feel separated from home is sometimes I feel like everyone at home is changing and I'm not updated on what's going on, you know? Like with my little sister, like, oh, you had a test? I didn't even know about it. That kind of thing. Slowly they have inside jokes that you can't relate to and you start feeling a little left out, a little homesick. But also that's part of growing up. You can't go back to that.
Yeah. It's part of the transition. Everybody's changing.
I know for me, I went to a school that was very majority Asian. So Emory's a lot more diverse than my school. And my friend group back in high school was primarily Indian American girls like me. So I came here, my parents were like, there's not going to be that many Indian girls. How will you make friends? Seek them out. And I didn't really click with any Indian girls here right away, even though I went to the events, the cultural clubs and stuff. But most of the friends I've made aren't Indian. I've made a very diverse set of friends. And my parents, especially me too, there was this concern that we wouldn't be able to relate to one another. But now that we're talking, I realize we have so much in common. And also I'm hearing so much new stuff from them that's causing my mind to explode every day. So now that I've kind of taken that pressure off of finding people who I share an ethnicity with, I feel relieved. It's one less criterion friends.
Yeah. I like the way you describe that.
Thank you.
I think that's also a way to take care of yourself. I think a lot of people think coming in for, let's say, counseling services is just, I'm just going to be talking about my sadness or my anxiousness. But coming to therapy sometimes can help you navigate how to adjust. And as you were just describing, adjusting sometimes is recreating your life in ways that you didn't know you needed, right? So one of the things I had to learn, because I grew up in a predominantly Black African American community, and I went to school in Maine. So from Alabama to Maine, talk about a culture shock. And I just expected to connect with all the other Black African American students on campus. But what I found out is even within my community, we are not a monolith. Right? And so that forced me to really understand myself beyond my racial, ethnic background and get to know, who am I as, a student? Who am I as an extroverted introvert, And that is what helped me to recreate my life on campus in a way that felt in alignment with who I was becoming.
Yeah, because you start to recognize what parts of self or what identities you hold are most salient for you. And I think that changes, my experience with college. So I grew up in a military family. We moved around a lot. And while there was diversity, I still lacked seeing people who look like me in a classroom. So my desire was to go to a historically Black college and university. So I went to an HBCU. And that was different for me too, you know. But it was nice because I feel like it set me on my path toward my own racial identity development, which has been a strong foundation for me.
Yeah. When you're constructing your own identity and your racial identity, it's very personal.
Yes.
There's no, meet as many diverse people you can meet, or like, only talk to people of your own ethnicity. Like, once we take that pressure off and just meet people, then,
Yeah. And it takes letting your guard down. And it takes addressing any biases that you may have, you know. And I feel like nowadays we're getting hit with that harder. There's a mirror in front of us every day where you have to make contact with that.
Yes.
And I think letting your guard down in college can be especially difficult because, I mean, for me in high school, I didn't really care what people thought. I had a solid group of friends. Like, no matter what happens, we'll ride or die, you know? But over here, I don't know anyone. I need to make a good first impression. I don't want anyone to think that I'm weak or vulnerable. So that also adds a lot of pressure.
Coming to college, there's a lack of sustained history. Everything feels new. You're literally creating things from the ground up when we think about your social support networks or your friend group. And so as opposed to the people back home who've known you for ages, they're invested and you're for sure certain that they're not going anywhere. Whereas when you get to college, it's like, oh my goodness, this is still the foundation. And so with that comes an increased fear of rejection because things are still tentative, things are still new, and that can be scary and make you double think about what are others thinking about me or second guess yourself. You're building.
And in order to build, you got to test.
Yes.
So you're going to make mistakes. I think students come in feeling like they have to be perfect. You got to get it all right the first time, and you don't. I think this is your time to make those mistakes and to learn from them and to take those risks.
Yeah. And honestly, I felt like I didn't really start to connect with people until I became a little vulnerable. Coming into college, one of my fears was and things have been really good for the past couple years, but I was scared things would get bad and no one here really knows how to help me. And I was also scared people would find out and they'd think I was crazy. Because with depression and anxiety, to some degree, everyone relates. Everyone knows what it's like to feel sad or anxious. But oftentimes with things like OCD, it's very hard for people to understand. I remember I was just talking to one of my friends and I said something and she's like, Pranjal, do you have OCD? And I was like, how do you know? And she's like, I have it too. And then after we talked, we agreed that we're going to be each other's support system because she was also feeling the same way. She was also scared of things getting bad again. And I found someone who I can rely on when it comes to this aspect of my life. And I wouldn't have discovered that if I had just been like, no, what are you talking about? That's a crazy accusation to me.
Kind of going back to the myth thing, the thing that oftentimes draws us to other people or makes us connect to other people is recognizing the humanity in them, recognizing that they struggle just like we struggle. It creates a sense of camaraderie. It creates a sense of compassion as well as empathy. And those are the bedrocks of vulnerability and connection. So actually, it behooves you to show those sides of yourself because that's how you're going to initiate and maintain the connection. Being vulnerable.
I think that's kind of why I made the most friends in my chemistry class.
Because it's a struggle.
So difficult. We're all sitting together. We're like, I do not understand this. And we're bonding in our confusion.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, because you could have easily sat there and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I got this. Meanwhile, I'm struggling in silence. And I think that is so detrimental to us when we allow ourselves to struggle in silence. And so giving yourself permission to just say it aloud, like, this shiggity is confusing. And so what are we going to do about that?
While we're on the topic of myths, one of the myths I came in with was that college was going to be way easier than high school.
It's not. No. because you've got to stick to your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
You have no one reminding you about anything. You get the syllabus in your class. You better review that. If you don't, you probably gonna miss some quizzes, some tests or something like that. But yeah, I think it's not so much the material is harder, you think, to a degree, but I think it's the structure or lack thereof around it that makes it difficult.
Yeah. And I think in many ways, life is happening a lot more, or you're exposed to life a lot more. Because when you're, with your parents or you're back home, there's still a little bit of you that's sheltered and protected.
Yeah.
Whereas in college, you're exposed to a lot of new things.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult, not just academically, but on the social, just human side of things. You're experiencing life really from out underneath the shadows a little bit. And that can be very much a shock to the system.
Absolutely. And you notice we're disclosing a lot about ourselves, and I think it's important so that, your listeners hear that we're human too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that we've been there before. And I think for me, one of the myths I held, or I thought, I was quiet in high school. So I was like, when I get to college, I'm coming out. That, I'm just going to be so outgoing.
Yes.
And while I did some things,
Yeah.
I still was that introverted Tenille.
Yeah.
But I found ways to still connect with other people, to go out and to do the things that fed my soul. But I thought I was going to be this social butterfly.
Yeah.
That just wasn't me.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of a little on the other end for me. I went in just on top of everything and really thought that was the bulk of my intelligence, my ability to be successful. How organized am I? How much can I work ahead? But I think college taught me that I am who I am. And when the essence of you is someone who excels, if you change up your schedule and let's say you complete an assignment 2 days before it's due as opposed to 3 months before it's due, you'll get through it because you, RaiNesha, are smart and intelligent. All these other things around you just boost that. But you were the cake before the icing came. And so I think college helped me to grasp who I really was, because for so long I thought it was all the fluff, and all those things helped me to be smart and achieve, but it's like, no, I do those things because you are you.
Those are all the questions I had for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to be continuing this conversation with Dr. Tenille Gaines and Dr. RaiNesha Miller. So if any of you have any questions for them, please feel free to email notanotherdepressedteen@gmail.com. We're going to be going more in depth on mental health struggles in college and what you can do to tackle them. So I'm very excited for that episode, and I hope this episode was very informational. Once again, please don't hesitate to email us with any lingering questions, and thank you for listening.